have such sights to show you.
We're Poppin the Scary Horror Podcast here. I'm your host, Coale, and with me, as always, I have my good friend and co-host, Aaron. Aaron, hello. How about that rain? Am I right?
Yeah, we're getting soaked.
Yeah, you're at Poppin the Scary. We are sure getting soaked.
It's wet here.
In your window.
Yeah.
Anyways.
I wasn't even feeling that one. My energy, I was just like, I gotta make a sex joke now.
I know, just like, really, we're going to demean
right
ourselves.
now.
We're going to lower our standard, our level,
It's
our prestige.
what the people want.
Yeah, that's true. That's true. Got to give what the people want there. But this time with this episode, I thought I would give you something that maybe you would want, which is the sequel to Frankenstein. Because if you've listened to our episode, you were very much a big fan of it.
I liked Frankenstein.
Yes.
It was a good movie adaptation. I guess the difference for me going in is I don't really know the story of the Bride of Frankenstein. Like, I feel like everybody kind of knows, Frankenstein a little bit, but I don't know what the Bride's all about, unless it is the parts that they did not adapt into the movie that's involving, like, I don't know, can you spoil can I spoil Mary Shelley's Frankenstein?
Y'all had over 200 years nearly to read the book, so we're just gonna spoil the book.
Isn't there a part, because I've never actually read all the way through it yet, oopsie daisy, my bad.
Yeah.
But I read Junji Ito's adaptation, and there's like a part where he wants a wife, and he makes Dr. Frankenstein build him a wife. Is that the story of this movie?
Well, you're not entirely wrong there,
Okay.
boss. Yeah, I mean, it's literally in the title, Bride of Frankenstein, so it's
Right.
kind of like...
But Frankenstein's monster is like basically like, bro, I'll build me another woman because I hate looking at myself or whatever, and I need another monster to be monstrous with. So I don't know if that's the plot of this movie, but I think that's how it goes in the book, right?
Yeah, it does happen in the book, basically, where there's a moment whenever he confronts Henry. I always get him mixed up. I believe it's Henry in the book and then Victor in the movie. I think it's flipped. But basically, there comes a point in the book that, because for those that haven't read the book, the depiction of the monster in Frankenstein is more mundane. It's less of the like rah, rah, that Boris Karloff does, and it's more just kind of like a more nuanced to take. He's just a deformed looking dude, reanimated, asking a lot of questions. And there is a point where he's like, I want you to make me a wife so that way I'm not alone. So I have someone that understands me. And ultimately, while Henry is working on it, he ultimately is like, no, I'm not doing this at all.
I'm not making the same mistake twice.
Yeah.
Making another monster.
And then they leave on amicable terms.
And everyone was happy at the end.
Yes. Spoiler alert, that's not how it goes. But yeah, that's the general gist of it and everything. So yeah, doing a sequel is very interesting because with a lot of the older Universal monster films, they have several sequels. I mean, I have like a whole monster collection that has a lot of the films that Universal put out. But this is one of the rare ones that is directed by James Whale, who directed the first one. And not only that, but has a lot of the returning characters, like Boris Karloff is back as Frankenstein's monster, and Colin Clive is playing Victor Frankenstein again. But then you have a whole bunch of new characters that appear as well. And are you nervous about going into a sequel to a film that you lauded so highly? Because sequels are very tricky.
They can be, yeah. And especially, usually what I associated, at least before we started watching some of these Universal monster movies, is, I kind of associated with it, more like the Wolfman style, the creature from the lagoon style, kind of like cheesy, hokey, you know.
Mm-hmm.
But then like Frankenstein was actually like, you know, it was good. I was like, okay, like, you know, it wasn't. It held up really well. So. But I don't know because this could be one that doesn't hold up well. Because when I think of the Bride of Frankenstein, the only image in my head is like the cartoon depictions where she has like the white streak Marge hair afro or something, and you know, the bolts in the neck, and I don't know. Is it gonna be hokey or is it gonna be dope? I don't know. Who knows?
Or is it going to be Dokey?
Yeah,
Dokey. Doing something like that. Because did you know Frankenstein had a sequel called Bride of Frankenstein? Because obviously you knew the character Bride of Frankenstein.
I figured she came from something, so when you said the title, I was like, oh, it must be like Bride of Frankenstein if there's a Frankenstein sequel. But no, I mean, I don't know much about the movie, the plot itself. I don't know.
Okay, no worries. Yeah, my history with it is kind of interesting because I was kind of the same opinion growing up that, you know, it's like I knew of like Bride of Frankenstein, like they would throw them in and it's like,
like
oh,
a
that's
Scooby-Doo episode or something, you know?
Yeah, something like that, or Burger King crossover, or something like that. So I knew about it, but I never really thought about the film. And again, I feel like that's just what most people growing up, that's a kind of their first introduction really is actually rarely the films. It's usually like media depiction of it and pop culture in general. So whenever it came to visiting this film, I kind of went in with interesting aspect because I love Frankenstein. It's my favorite Universal monster film, bar none. And going into a sequel, I was just like, okay, how can you top this and everything else? But also at the same point, it does feel good that it is spearheaded by the same guy who made the first one, as opposed to it being hand off. But sometimes I feel like it doesn't matter if it's done by the same person. They could still mess up royally.
Yeah, especially after a big success. I mean, I assume Frankenstein was a success. I mean, then studios might have a little more hand in the next sequel, and then sometimes they muck it up, you know?
Yeah, so I'll leave it very nuanced, but once we watch the film, I'll get more into my initial opinion versus my opinion after having watched it this time. So yeah, and it'll be a good, interesting episode. Definitely curious to see what you have to say about it, and we'll be right back after we watch the film, okay, y'all?
The Bride of Frankenstein.
And we are back from watching The Bride of Frankenstein. And Aaron. Yeah, you were right, partly. That it picks up where the first one left off.
Yeah, I was curious how they were going to do it because of how they ended the last movie, you know? But they kind of swung it around, and yeah, you can definitely see the book storylines that they borrowed, but then also the creative liberties they took themselves.
Yeah, so how do you think that paid off overall?
I thought it was pretty good. Yeah. I guess spoiler alert for my rating, but I don't think it's quite hits the peak of Frankenstein. But it was a good movie. Yeah.
I agree with that sentiment wholeheartedly because there are individuals who actually prefer this film over the first one, and for me, it's like one of those things where, you know, whenever you hear someone spout that opinion, you just keep looking. You're like, okay, am I like overlooking something or anything at all? Because it is a good film.
Yeah.
It's just, I'm also partial to the first film myself and everything, and never got quite behind the hype. Because overall, I would explain this film as like, it has golden moments. Like, this is perfect, wonderful, amazing. And then there's a lot of filler.
Yeah, there are some just strokes of stuff that I would consider fairly meh or mediocre. Even some stuff that didn't age super well, which, I mean, what can you expect? This is, what, 30s?
Yes, it released 4 years after Frankenstein, so 1935.
I see. Yeah. So, like, you know, there's stuff when they do jump cuts sometimes or whatever, I'm going to forgive them for that. But, like, there is some stuff that also just, like, objectively doesn't age super well. A lot of that theatrical acting style at the time, too, doesn't always translate. And there are some moments of just where it was getting drab, and I felt like I was watching Act 1 of a pretty good play, but like not one that not a movie necessarily that I'm locked in for. But a lot of that is product of the time, I think, and I think overall the experience was good.
Yeah, well, that's definitely good to hear. Good to hear for opening thoughts. And let's go ahead and just dive right into that plot. So, obviously, spoiler alert for the first Frankenstein film, but it basically picks up exactly where it left off at the burning windmill, where we actually before then get a very strange introduction from Mary Shelley.
Yeah, we get a previously on. Yeah, because it's Mary Shelley and Percy Shelley and Lord Byron all chilling in their fancy ass mansion and recalling the events of Mary Shelley's Frankenstein to like tell the audience what happened in the last movie.
Yeah, which in itself is very odd considering that it went off book, but they're just rolling with it like, yes, this is exactly a story. And then they have like a whole intro where they have Mary Shelley be like, oh, that's not where the story ends. It continues on.
Right, let me tell you.
And then it picks up at the burning windmill where it turns out the monster of Dr. Frankenstein is alive. Again, it's so weird whether to call him the monster or Frankenstein, because I used to be pedantic about it. I'm like, technically it's the monster, not Frankenstein, but there's been so many arguments back and forth. So if we end up changing it up as a heads up, I'm just like, whatever, just trying to get through it. But anyways, so the monster turns out to still be alive and everything. And while this is going on, Victor Frankenstein is trying to reel in what just happened and is trying to walk away from it. However, a previous figure from his past happens to arrive and try to create life once again.
Yeah, an old colleague.
Yeah, and plot-wise, I mean, I feel like it's sound. Makes sense. I don't feel it doesn't feel unnatural. It feels like a natural, like...
I will say, like, a little bit of it, like, when they were on this Lord Byron part, and then they just get up and go from there, it did feel a little bit like retcon.
Oh, yes.
I was like, retcon, they're fine. But then, yeah, everything past that did feel pretty natural flowing into it.
Yes, it was definitely an odd choice to open with Mary Shelley and everything, as opposed to just cutting open to the windmill, which... I don't know. It's one of those things where I'm like, it's an odd way to open a film, but I don't mind it.
Yeah, it's kind of hokey, and it definitely is part of what gives me the like theatrical vibes rather than the cinematic ones. But
yeah, absolutely. And I enjoyed it. And going along with the story, there is like, you know, obviously the title of the film is Bride of Frankenstein, and that's what they end up creating. So, you know, you're like waiting for it. You're like, where's the bride and everything?
Yeah, I saw the cover. Yeah.
Yes, exactly. And so you're kind of waiting around, but fortunately, that's not really like the main draw of the story. Because in my opinion, a lot of story beats they do put into the film, there is a lot of meandering around at some parts, but some parts do go pretty solid, whether it's just good acting, heartwarming hokiness, or just really impressive effects for 1935 again. Like, they just really did a lot of stuff where even now I'm like, man, that's really dadgum impressive there. So I don't have too much of a problem with the story. I just feel like the first film is just so much tighter with the narrative and it goes through.
I'd agree. Yeah, the first film didn't have the challenges that this one does, because they were just trying to condense, you know, a classic work into a movie title, and you know, that's a challenge in its own. But it's, you know, it's not quite the same thing as whenever you've done that, and then you have to make a second movie based off of the source material you didn't use the first time, and then make it make sense. And like, okay, well, these people have to be alive now because they did just throw Dr. Frankenstein off a roof, so now he has to be fine, and then they have to recover, and there has to be a reason for him to make the bride, so we have to like sneak this scene back in this way or whatever. I saw how they were kind of moving the pieces around just because like I'm familiar enough with the story of Frankenstein that I'm like, oh yeah, I see. But Yeah, I think they did it pretty successfully. I think, like there's a little bit of awkwardness in parts, but I think for the most part it runs together pretty smoothly.
Yeah, I would wholeheartedly agree with that, and I'm sure we'll talk more about story beats as we continue on. But obviously, the leading man to talk about in this film is Colin Clive, who returns to play as Henry Frankenstein, and again, I feel like he's really good. But the thing that I admired about him the most in the first film is just how he's in the midst of his craziness. Like, that's
Right.
whenever he's just firing on all cylinders. But in this role, he has to play a very much different sort of character, like one that's
Yeah.
reformed, and he's like, no, I don't want to do this
Right, because
at
after the
all.
events of the last film, it would feel really fake to us, like untrue to his character, for him to just be like, "Whoop, time to make another one," because he was traumatized by the monster that he unleashed. And he's like, "I made a terrible mistake," and so they have to give him a reason. So they introduce a different mad scientist, I think.
Yes, just to kind of do what, like, just in order to help the story get to the point of the bride arriving and everything. And he does do a good job and everything. The one thing that does bum me out, because I know about his character, and I didn't know if you noticed this, granted, it could be a combination of stuff, but he looks terrible in this film,
Oh,
but
yeah.
not in the sense of, like, like, oh man, you've let yourself go, but he looks like very sickly and everything. And part of it could be deemed to, like, well, it's him having, like, survived on the brink of death after the last encounter with the
Yeah.
monster and everything, and being stressed out and everything. But in real life, Colin Clive had a problem with alcohol and everything, so he was a major alcoholic. And it actually would be 2 years later whenever he would die from tuberculosis due to his chronic alcoholism. So this is like one of the last films he did and everything, and
Oh, that's sad.
yeah, and so it just kind of bums me out. It's like just kind of seeing like an actor, just anytime I saw him perform, I saw him giving it all and everything, but I just felt like the vigor of the first film is just way, way less. Now, granted, I know in the first film he's like deep in the juice of trying to create life and everything, whereas
Yeah.
this one he's a lot more sober, no pun intended, whenever it comes to the idea of like trying to do it again
Yeah.
and everything.
He doesn't have that charisma as the, main quote unquote character of this film. But yeah, I just definitely wrote it off to like, he's just survived that condition and this isn't his driven mission. I must create life, anymore. He's like, oh, that was a mistake. And he's having to be sort of drug along. And they give a lot of that passion and energy to, what's his name?
Dr. Pretorius.
Pretorius.
Who arrives, and Dr. Pretorius brings that manic insanity that the first film had, and that this film did desperately need.
Yeah, and that like philosophical side. They say he's a philosophy professor or whatever, and so but he's very idealistic and like, we can create a race of these people.
Yeah, he is by far one of the biggest shining elements of this film and everything. Colin Clive is still good and is able to deliver lines strongly and everything. I just feel like comparatively to the first film, it's definitely a weaker performance, but it's not too much on him. It's just a
Yeah.
combination of script and just overall what the character demands and everything.
Yeah,
But
he's kind of the straight man to the other crazy guy now.
yes, for sure. And let's go ahead and talk about him. Dr. Pretorius, as I mentioned, is played by Ernest Thesker. And he is absolute mad scientist as well. Like, you could just tell he's just unhinged, macabre, just very dark humor. I mean, literally, you see one scene where he's just cackling away, just drinking in front of a skull. Like, he is dark and insane, and it's wonderful. I think just sort of the vibe that this film did need to be raised up by that sort of like dark humor and everything that had going on, and his want to create life and everything, and his sort of like very obsessed manic state helps to add what was in the first film and everything.
Mm-hmm.
And again, he almost kind of proves to be sort of a vice for Victor and everything, because he does kind of tempt Victor along about the idea about creating life, and whenever he shows his work, Victor is very, very interested, and it's just kind of like someone just trying to recover from something they were obsessed with, and then they're kind of getting tempted back again and again, but has to snap back into reality, be like, no, this is wrong. I promise I would never do this. I'm a changed man. I need to keep going.
It's like he quit alcohol, and then his other alcoholic friend came by and was like, "Bro, we got in the bar."
Yes. Oh my gosh.
He's like, "No, I want to, but I'm not like that anymore."
Yeah.
Come on, let's make some dead bodies alive.
That is a sad but appropriate, very much appropriate there. So, definite kudos goes to him. He's definitely one of the, as I mentioned, golden moments of this film. He's definitely one of the golden moments.
Mm-hmm.
Like, he just eats the scene he's at, and as quickly as he gets towards that sort of like jovial sort of look, he also has like a dead-eyed stare of just being very malicious in what he wants to gain and everything.
I love it. He's got like a Fae energy, you know what I mean?
Yes, I would agree with that. Very
like,
Fae energy.
He's just like willing to make little word plays and thinks everything's so amusing,
Yeah, I would definitely agree, and his presence in the film is highly welcomed and everything, so yeah, major kudos there. Going down the list, one of the actors, or should I say actress, that appears for the first time in this film, despite the character being in the previous film, is Valerie Hobson, who plays Elizabeth this time, which is not the person who was played previously. So it's like one of the weird substitutes where it's like, I'm the same character, but you can tell it's different, but they don't hardly give her any screen time to where you can really think like this isn't the same actress at all. You just are like, okay. And it's bad because I felt like they half-assed try to make her character interesting. Like there was that one moment whenever they bring Victor back and she's like stressing about something or whatever, about seeing something. It feels like it should be more powerful than what it is, but it just kind of felt awkward.
Yeah, she doesn't have much of a role besides to just be like concerned about Henry, and that's it. Be concerned about Dr. Frankenstein.
Yeah, just being concerned about Victor's health and everything, and it's bad. It's just kind of bad, but as we've mentioned before, them's the breaks, I guess, sometimes with the way they wrote for women back in the day. But again, it does get offset at the very least, because with the characterization of Mary Shelley, I actually found her performance very likable and everything. And I feel so bad for Valerie. I don't have anything against your performance. There's just nothing to it.
Yeah, she didn't have a big role, really. As big of a role in this one.
Yeah, she's, like, again, just meant to care for Victor. So, yeah, talking about Mary Shelley and everything, who's played by Elsa Lanchester. She's one of the characters that I did want to address because she did have, like, very fun, lighthearted energy, and I believed that was an appropriate characterization of Mary Shelley, just like some normal person that comes up with this like insane idea.
Right, yeah. I mean, if I remember correctly, Frankenstein was written during a period where there was like a really, really long and dark winter. Like it was very, very long, very few hours in the day. And so it has that macabre kind of feel. And it was also during this time, whenever people were doing experiments and like science was becoming like, whoa, and they were zapping frog legs with electricity and making them dance, and people were theorizing these things like, what if we could take, what if we could create life? What if we found the secret to life is magnetism and the electricity? Like there's wonder in that at this time. So it was it was like a believable and very frightening science fiction tale at the time.
Yeah, and I think that's just what makes it all the more powerful. And again, they didn't have to throw in that bit at the beginning, and while it is a bit hokey, more so due to the performance of like Lord Byron and everything, just goading on and on like, what a macabre tale going on,
right.
bringing death to life. Just, and like big fancy pants music is playing in the background. They even had like those rich, weird looking dogs that you see rich people have in the late 1800s. It was just very hokey and funny, but again, I sincerely enjoyed it, and I thought it was like a risk that just for the most part I felt like worked out fine, because they just have that, and then that's all you see of it.
It came across as pretty like unserious, but it was still like, it was fun, I don't fault the film too much for that.
One of the people I do want to mention, did you recognize any of the actors or actresses in this film where you're like, I feel like I've seen this person before?
Not besides like the one I knew, like the ones that from the earlier Frankenstein film. But
well, I'm definitely surprised, because there is one person that did return, and she was previously in The Invisible Man.
I mean, it's that crazy woman, right?
Yes.
Okay, I thought she was just in the first Frankenstein, because I was like, "There's no, she must be here still." But she, okay. I forgot that she was in Invisible Man too. That's where she was the barmaid or whatever.
Yes, she's the one that was just screaming all over your place, and you're like, "What in the world is she doing?" So
she had many of those moments in this film.
Yes, Una O'Connor, who plays Minnie in the film. If you know her performance in Invisible Man, just copy and paste with this film, which apparently James Whale loved her so much and thought she was hysterical. So I'm sure he just kind of let her run wild on set.
She is a hoot. I feel like she doesn't quite match like any film she's in.
I feel the same, because like
it's like she's doing a theater show and she's like clicking her
yes.
heels and like da, 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 da. That's the kind of performance in her she brings, and she is funny, but it's just like it's way over the top.
Yeah, I feel very much the same way, where it's just like, like it's funny, out of place, but it kind of, whereas like Invisible Man is already just unhinged because the Invisible Man himself is insane, and there are insane individuals in Frankenstein. It just definitely throws me out of it. Just, I have to stand all the way back here hearing like doing whatever. It's just like, oh my.
Yeah, it's intense.
So it's like, it's funny, but it also hurts the film.
It does.
Yeah.
It is kind of like I'm at my local improv. That's how I would vote the performance.
Yeah, that's how it is. So that's very, very unfortunate. One of the weird characters to actually return, but it's the same actor but a different character, is that Stephen Fry returns to Bride of Frankenstein, which, if you remember, he played Fritz in he played Fritz in the first Frankenstein, and he played oh my gosh, I can't think of his character from Dracula, Renfield. He played that character, and he's one of the criminals. Which is like so funny, but I mean, I guess he's just that good of an actor and everything. Just
do another role,
bring him back, and he basically fulfilled the same role as Fritz in the first film and everything. So that's something else. So that was just something neat I found, like whenever it came to returning actors. But I think the biggest character to talk about returning is, of course, the titular character, the monster, who is once again played by Boris Karloff. And what did you feel about his performance, character development, and everything else? Because they kind of surprisingly do more with the monster's development and everything.
Yeah, they do a lot more to humanize him, and so he has a lot more, like, not only acting in those moments where he can actually, like, kind of do, like, lines and stuff, he's also, like, he has to act as a monster that transforms from being just, like, in the beginning to being, like, more closer to human and humanized by the end. So he has to act differently as he goes along. But
yeah, I felt like it was definitely an interesting performance, because like a lot of people don't really, again, we mentioned this in the intro, they don't really realize the original interpretation of the monster is the fact that he was actually just pretty smart, very observant,
Yeah,
just
he could
very
talk. Yeah, he was
very intellectual.
He was on par with humanity. He was just a giant and made of undead stone barks. Yeah.
Yeah, so it's very interesting that, of course, the most popular depiction of Frankenstein is still the
Yeah.
but in this film, they kind of just go in the middle of the road where basically, they don't make Boris Karloff sound like eloquent with his words,
No.
but they still make him more sentient and show a lot, again, lots of like his thoughts, but he's able to speak as well and everything. Because, I mean, Boris Karloff is absolutely amazing, perfect in Frankenstein, and all he has to do is just give that dead-eyed look and you could still just read the emotion, whereas he's a bit more expressive in this film, which is an interesting choice, which overall I felt like it worked fine, but it almost, I don't know, it just almost felt like this isn't Frankenstein in my eyes. It's like that weird thing where it's like it is but isn't. So I don't know, maybe that's just me. I feel like it's good for the film or whatever. That's just like one of the sacrifices where it's just kind of like him going to be like good, doing that, and it's like good for the story, but then it just I don't know, I'm just a big sucker for the first film, I guess. So it's one of those weird things that it's not even a criticism of like, oh, I just wish he went still, because I feel like the story would not work otherwise.
No, yeah.
But it does just sort of throw me back where I'm like, okay, he's a bit different this time round.
Yeah, I thought they did a good job of like getting him to a place where he could communicate better with people, with the friend he finds in the woods and that whole little arc. I thought that was nice and poetic and like a lot of the novel. And I know they took a lot of that from the book inspiration, but I thought that was a way that made sense for him to learn to like relate to people.
Yeah, and I feel like they definitely had like good moments, like kind of explaining how he's able to learn these words and sort of explore his feelings about his wants and everything, because before he's just like, I'm existing.
Right, and like understand these things that in the book are self-explanatory because he's always had that level of intelligence or whatever, and that's been expressed. But in this one, they have to like show that development, and then also have him feel more complicated things like alone bad,
Yeah, so I feel like overall it's still a very good performance and everything. It's just one of those things where it's bad whenever you have the first film to compare and everything, because by itself it's very, very strong of a film and everything. It's just kind of interesting to compare the two. Yeah, and for the most part, other characters do pop up later in the film, but I figure like just kind of mentioning them right now at the forefront, since they kind of only appear once and then that's it and everything. So we'll definitely go to that whenever it happens. But one of the things I do want to talk about is the set pieces and everything. And I always have an appreciation for like old monster movie sets and everything, and just the overall vibes they're able to get, whether it's like through the graveyards, or I even liked portions where it shows the monster just wandering through the woods or whatever, just throughout nature, and having like actual lambs in the background or deep in crypts. It's a vibe, as you would say.
I mean, it's just the perfect setting. I mean, the crawling through the Black Forest in Germany or whatever as a Frankenstein's monster. I mean, I do wish that, I almost wish they did like, focus on some of those dark fantasy elements a little bit more, being out in the woods and stuff. But I mean, I think the story makes sense as it is, but it is just, it's such a nice time of year to be watching that kind of film too.
It really is. It hits the mood. It hits a spot for that sort of like fall time sort of film and everything. And of course, like seeing the little like, Barovian villages and everything. It's all good sets and everything. I still struggle because I felt like, the first film did definitely have some like landmark settings, and I felt like it's one of those weird things where they tried to explore new settings, but they also knew they had to have like classic stuff like the lab or sort of like the graveyard.
Yeah.
You have to like hit those landmark locations.
Yeah, I feel like they did that with not only the sets, but also with the story beats a little bit. It's like, yeah, you have to have the, like, it's alive scene, and, like, there's certain things that it's expected. But...
Yes, it's definitely interesting, like, how much you continue on from the first film, where you introduce new elements and try some new things and everything, because they definitely had some, like, interesting set pieces. Like, one of them is just kind of showing, like, underneath the wreckage of the burned windmill, they have like sort of like that watery area, and I thought
like a well under it,
yeah, and I thought that was like a cool set piece doing so. And even them, it just cracks me up that for the forest scene you could tell they made it in like a studio lot and everything, but they have like their own homemade waterfall as well, and it's just like so funny how much effort's put into it, just because it's like, okay, well, we have the budget and means, and it's going to be easier than picking up and trying to find a location outside.
Yeah, you could tell some of the places where they had some budget, too. I mean, even for the, the 30s film or whatever.
Yeah, definitely budget
the lab
is...
especially, and even all that scene was cool, the special effects.
Oh my gosh, yeah, the special effects, especially because I think you and I are thinking the same thing, but whenever Dr. Pretorius is showing off his work to Victor and everything...
Yeah, it's interesting.
Yeah, like, it's just very impressive, and while you can pretty much, I guess, you're like, oh yeah, they probably use green screen and just
you can tell some camera tricks, yeah.
They still try to implement it, like... even better by showing like, a close-up of like the tweezers picking up stuff and everything. I feel like overall they did a good job just sort of flexing what film could do whenever it came to special effects.
Well, even just, and you could tell there's budget with like the ending scene, because that didn't look like a model. There's a thing that explodes at one point. That didn't look like a model.
It didn't. They did a very good job, like making it look like legit. Like doesn't look.
I wonder if they just blew that up in real life. But I don't. Anyway,
yeah.
But if they did, that would probably take some budget. I mean, that things look nice, but and the whole creating of the bride scene and everything. I mean, they did there are some impressive special effects. There are some stuff that like doesn't it like looks a little hokey, but it's for considering its age, I think the special effects stand up pretty well.
Yeah, I would most certainly agree. And it's like this film is like nearly 90 years old. It'll turn 90 next year, and it just still looks great and everything. Like, and even though there are some like special effects where I could tell like they would have a model set, but they try to overlap film on it, but the way they do it, it's like the people on the model would look transparent almost there. But that's all they had to work with at the time. Is like, how do we do this realistically? And it's like, let's just do this. The film quality is so bad anyways, they won't be able to tell. But then that's the magic of 4K, baby. Go back to the original source and they clean it up and everything. And so it's nice to feel like you're able to see exactly what they were able to see. But again, because it's so clean, it does ruin, I guess, that quote-unquote movie magic, because they didn't expect 90 years later for them to clean it up this well.
Watching, a digital version.
Yeah, I'm doing that, but and I guess we'll talk more. I'm trying to debate, because talking about the Bride of Frankenstein, I'm trying to decide whether to mention anything about it now or try to save it till after spoilers, since that's like the whole build up and everything.
I think I think maybe we just save it for spoilers.
Yeah, so
it's hard to talk about any of that kind of stuff.
Yeah, I guess like overall, like without spoiling anything about the Bride, what was your thought on
the reveal? I was wondering, because I'm familiar with a couple versions of the story of at least the creation of the Bride, and so I didn't know exactly what they were going to go with. I like the version they go with, though. That's my favorite ending.
I wholeheartedly agree. Like, the design of the Bride that they reveal is like perfect. Like it's just it's basically perfect in my mind.
Yeah.
Like, there is nothing that needs to be changed at all whatsoever. And we'll talk more about it, but I just wanted, for people not wanting to get spoiled on it, just know our general thoughts on it. And it makes waiting for the end of the film just worth it. Like, boom, because there's definitely some films that have teased sort of a reveal, and then whenever you get to it, it's so just lackluster or underwhelming, and you're like, okay, cool.
Right.
And fortunately, with the pace of the film, I never felt like, okay, just get to the point. Get to the point.
Let's get to it.
Even though it did spend a lot of time meandering, and there's definitely some segments of the film that I'm like, you could literally cut this out, I would not miss it.
Sure.
Which is, it's bad. Like, I feel like you could lop off, as ambitious as it is, like maybe 10 minutes of this film, and it would still
you could
be
condense it down for sure.
and I'm sure it's just they're trying to extend the runtime because they have like a goal to hit. Like, okay, we gotta hit.
And the pace of everything was just slower back then too. I mean, we have much shorter attention spans now when they're making movies.
For sure. But yeah, I mean, aside from that, any other things you want to talk about before getting into spoilers? It's kind of tricky, I know.
I don't think so. Yeah, let's dive in.
Okay, excellent. So with that said, we are going to talk about the rating of The Bride of Frankenstein.
Ratings.
So please take it away, Aaron.
Well, yeah, I think the things that I'm like subtracting from the score the most for this film is a lot of hokey stuff. It is that woman that's going, whenever she sees Frankenstein's monster, and some of that kind of, and some of the transitions that are a little chunky, But overall, I think this is a good film with a good story, and maybe the pacing could be a little bit. Maybe some of the elements that were interesting this time were less interesting because they were kind of repeats of the elements in the first Frankenstein. But I don't know how much of that could be avoided, given the story and the source material and everything. So I think they did a really good job with it. It's like a 7 out of 10 for me. Yeah.
Okay. Yeah. Pretty solid. Pretty fair. I like it. I like it a lot, and I ain't too far behind. For me, it's one of those things, like we've talked about this with like 10 Cloverfield Lane, where the golden moments of films can sometimes just make the ride worth it and everything. Like, for instance, John Goodman's performance, I feel like, is the heart and soul of 10 Cloverfield Lane and everything. And I feel like Bride of Frankenstein kind of follows same suit overall, where there are some scenes, some moments where I'm just like, oh man, that's just good cinema right there, boys and girls. Just good. It's just a fact that, even not comparing it to the first film, it just feels like there are some areas where I'm like, I feel like there's no value in the extra footage they showed or whatever. So it's unfortunate because, like, unlike the first film, where the only gripe I really have is how haphazard the ending is, like after that big climax. It's just a very nicely delivered film and everything. So yeah, whenever it comes to this film, I feel like it's still good. It's a good film. I definitely recommend people watch it. I'm still in the camp of I'm loving Frankenstein more than Bride of Frankenstein. But that being said, this film does get a very heartfelt, generous 8 out of 10 for me, where I do enjoy it. And like I said, it's just several scenes and just the Bride of Frankenstein herself appearing, and it's just a good film. It's just a good, enjoyable film, and I feel like it pairs nicely with Frankenstein, even though both Aaron and I do prefer Frankenstein over this film. So yeah, that's our rating for Bride of Frankenstein there. If you have any interest in watching it, obviously Aaron and I both give a hearty recommendation for it, but with that said, we're going to spoil the heck out of this film. So Aaron, take it away.
I don't know. I thought the blind guy was a good touch. Yeah. I mean, that's kind of how it is in the book, right? But like, okay, I don't remember because a lot of what I know about it is just because I read Junji Ito's version.
Yeah.
And in Junji Ito's version, he's like, staring through the hole in the wall, like spying on this family or whatever. And there's like a girl that's blind or something. And then whenever the whole family goes away, he sneaks in, and she's like, "Grandpa," whatever. And he's like, you know,
Yeah.
And so like I don't remember how it goes down in the book, but in this version of the movie where it's just the old man and like he's playing the violin, and he's like drawn in by the music in the woods. And then, you know, the old man is blind, so he can't see that this guy's a monster. And it's like, I thought it was, I mean, it might seem like straightforward now, but I mean, I thought for the story of Frankenstein, you know, I thought it was a great way to humanize and set up the feeling of like, yes, people see him and they perceive him as a monster before they get a chance to know him or whatever. But this guy doesn't, so he can learn to talk and what friends are or whatever, and also learn what companionship is with somebody that actually cares about you, and then to be like, well, I need that, especially after they run out the old man.
Yeah, the golden moments that I mentioned in the film, this is one of the gold moments. Like, just that whole scene with, apparently he's credited as the Hermit, played by O.P. Heggie. He does an amazing performance, and that whole scene and concept is well orchestrated. Again, I think it's been a while since I've read the novel and everything, and I can't remember exactly if there was any mention of it and everything. There probably was and everything.
We could look it up, but I borrowed it last time when we watched Frankenstein, and I have not given it back to you because I haven't finished it, but I did read part of it.
Yeah, you're fine. I'll Google it. Whenever I edit this, I'll just put it somewhere in the episode, at least on YouTube. So, yeah, that whole scene is not only just well done, like cinema wise, but it's also just highly a big necessity for the film itself. It's so good and so brilliant, because basically, including the first film and this one, everybody has been repulsed and scared by the monster and everything, and this hermit is the only person that connects, because again, they have no vision. They're lonely, so they're more willing to accept people, and again, extend that sort of kindness and everything. And the thing that I find beautiful about it is the fact that the monster is lured in because of the music and everything, which, you know, music is one of those things where you don't have to like speak like a language. It's one of those like innate natural things that calls to you and everything. It's just like
things that
music's like a universal language.
Yeah, it kind of reaches out to nature too, you know, to what we might consider lesser intelligent life forms, as, you know, like animals will respond to music. Yeah,
and I think it's just a brilliant, everything about it is just brilliant. And so it's just like this little tidbit that I feel like maybe James Whale was like, I have a really good idea I want to do in this film, because in all honesty, like it's such an important part of the film, and it's one of the most memorable parts, but that's just sort of the thing that threw me off, because you know, whenever the monster is wandering through the woods the first time, I was like, okay, yeah, I think I remember this, where there's like a misunderstanding whenever he runs into that woman who falls in the water and he's trying to save her and she's freaking out and he doesn't know what to do and runs away. I'm like, that's whenever he comes across the hermit. No, there's like a whole thing where he's wandering and like the burgomaster gets a mop, ties him up to a stick,
and then lock him in the
jail, and then he just breaks out of jail immediately, and then ends up going back in the woods.
Right.
And so like that whole section to me, like, while
unnecessary.
Yeah,
really.
It just felt unnecessary. And so that, and you know, I know, like, I agree that our attention spans are shorter, but it just almost feels kind of like, why? Like, I guess just to show his like strength or whatever, or the people like hating him just wanted to make sure that he feels extra hated, I guess.
I guess so, yeah. I think ultimately, yeah, you're right, it is pretty cuttable.
Yeah, but anyways, that being said, that's so, like, it was so weird being like, oh, right, there's this scene. But anyways, going back to the hermit, I just really enjoyed it a lot. I feel like both actors do a very good job just sort of like responding to one another, because it's such a powerful, interesting scene, because the monster doesn't immediately come swinging at him. Again, he's just sort of like looking for help, but whenever people scream, it's just like it immediately hits that fight or flight sort of thing in the monster.
They tried to burn him down in a building and he fell and barely survived, and so he's a little wary of these people waving pitchforks at him.
And so just not only having like someone be blind, but just again not being able to react, because like as soon as he makes a noise and tries to look towards the direction, he's like, I'm sorry, I'm completely blind. I don't know where you're at, and he just tries to lure him in and just is immediately just it's honestly probably the only bit of kindness that Frankenstein experienced. I know there was that other small bit whenever it came to the child in the first film before.
That scene does kind of mirror that, but where he's trying to be kind and then the misunderstanding and then he drowns.
But the hermit just serves not only to kind of show kindness towards the monster, but also kind of like allude more to this theme that overall the monster links onto, is the fact that he feels alone in this world, because even whenever it came to Victor creating him, it was definitely, Victor saw him more as an invention, a creation, as opposed to like a son or something that. And so whenever it came to love, he never really had a traditional sort of sense of love, but then getting like this overpouring kindness from someone, because they're not able to discriminate, they're just able to get to the person who they are, that allows them to connect and bond, and again, for narrative purposes, allows the monster to learn how to speak and everything. And while it is hokey and everything, with like how like they make it very soppy, heartwarming and everything, and even highlight the cross on the wall.
Yeah, that part is a little. He's like, I pray to God every day to bring me a friend.
Yeah, doing that, it just also, I feel like it's funny, but it is also just like, oh, that's nice. It's nice the monster gets a break.
Yeah, I mean, that's also just like, a lot of that's just the acting style and the writing style of the time, too. It's just like, everything's like that. It's all dramatized.
Yeah, but I do like how, again, like, he's teaching him stuff about life, like kind of like eating, drinking, and even partaking in smoking.
True, smoking good.
Doing that. But I do like how I feel like the intuition of the hermit is apt, where he's able to understand how the monster hates fire and everything after, he tries lighting a cigar or trying to grab soup for him, or again trying to take him over to the fireplace, and he just says like, he has like a really good line. I'm trying to think, like, fire is like neither bad nor good.
Yeah, because I don't think Frankenstein learned bad yet. He just said the Frankenstein's monster. He goes, he's like, fire not good, and he's like, no. He's like, things are neither good nor bad or something, and he's like, and he's like sitting there. And you can see the gears turning. And he's like,
yeah, and it's just a really nice, funny, good moment for him that makes it all the more heartbreaking whenever those two assholes break into the cabin. They're like, "There's the monster!"
Well, first they're like, "We're lost. Can you point us to town or whatever?" And then they see Frankenstein sitting there eating soup with him or whatever, and they're like, "Oh God, the monster!"
Yeah, and it's so bad because obviously the hermit has no idea what's going on.
He's like, "This is my friend."
Yeah, and he's like dragged away, and I understand the villagers see him as the monster and they're just protecting it, but it is just like, God damn, my man can catch a break.
I do feel like I believed the dialogue, because they had to give enough information for Frankenstein also to learn that he was created by Victor out of dead body parts or whatever. Because they're like, what are you talking about? And he's like, that creation is a monster. Victor Frankenstein put him together with dead parts or whatever. And they're like, oh, you believe I'm a bee? And they, of course, they're knocking around the place while the fireplace is lit, and so the house catches on fire, and he gets caught in the fire again. I thought it was good the way that they tie scenes together in important moments are poetic. But
yeah, that whole segment of just the monster and the hermit just in that cabin together, it's just well done, just from beginning to end. It just feels like a good freaking solid part of the movie that helps really elevate the film as a whole. And so it's just moments like that keep this film afloat.
Yeah, and it carries forward like the tragedy of Frankenstein. Like Frankenstein's monster's just tragic, not because he is like a murderer, you know, but like he's a total Lenny from Mice and Men situation. He's not trying to do any harm, but like harm follows him everywhere he goes.
Yes, yeah, doing that. But yeah, it's, man, and it's so. I'm trying to figure out like what to talk about, because I feel like I should mention some of the slower parts, but there's just nothing to mention.
So much of it is skippable, yeah.
Yeah, so much of it is skippable, which is bad, but it's not in the fact that the stuff that's skippable is like inherently god awful.
No, it's a lot of exposition and
yeah, doing stuff like whether it's like Dr. Pretorius meeting up with Victor whenever he's like resting in bed and just being like, hey, you want to create life? And he's like, I don't know. And then he shows his creation, which is like little like small people in mason jars
that he has dressed up like royal family members. Yeah,
doing that. And they have like a whole hokey scene where the king's trying to get to the queen and crawls out, and then he has to pick him up with a pair of tweezers. And afterwards, like Victor snaps out of it going like, nope, this is not what we should be doing, or whatever. And Dr. Pretorius is obviously dead set. He's like, I'm going to do this whether you help me or not. And goes forward. And it does lead to, again, what I would consider the next golden moment of this film, which is the crypt, whenever the monster is trying to escape from a big mob, running away from everything. He crawls into a crypt to try to hide and everything, and then that's whenever Dr. Pretorius and two criminal thugs he's hired are going into a crypt trying to find a young female skeleton and everything to create. And I love Dr. Pretorius like sending him off or whatever, just being like, okay, yep, I'll call you guys later or whatever.
He's like, I quite like being here or whatever.
Yeah.
Like, you two pop off now.
Yeah, and he just has like the stack of bones that he just
has a picnic by.
has a picnic by as he's giggling, smoking a cigar, drinking his whiskey.
Yeah, it is. This is like probably the most literary ass scene, because he's like holding the skull.
Yeah.
And he's like, oh, the monster, you know, or whatever. But he's like talking about the skull as if he's like, behold the monster, because he's envisioning like the Bride of Frankenstein.
Yeah.
Right? But then of course Frankenstein's right behind him, hiding in the crypt, and like approaches, and he's like, oh, I thought I was alone, you know.
Yeah, which is funny because again he just underreacts to it and doesn't go in fear because his mind's fucked up. He's just like...
He's like, this is what I've been searching for you, so I'm glad you're here, yeah.
Yeah, and just talking about it nonchalantly, and he's like, yeah, you know, you're interested in this? And the monster's like, friend. And he's like, man. And he's like, woman. You need a woman in your life.
Well, I love that Frankenstein walks up in part because he's smoking a cigar there too, and he's like, smoke? Good. And he's like, sure, have a cigar, friend, you know, and sit down. Yeah. I do love how this is kind of, you can see the more complex thought whenever they talk about, because he says something about death or something, and he's like, Frankenstein liked death or something, and he's like, death better than life.
Yeah, yes, he does say that.
And then Dr. Pretorius or whatever, he's like, so wise you are, my friend.
Yeah, I'm doing that, but it's also funny because I feel like Dr. Pretorius leads the monster and manipulates him a bit, much. Just trying to be like,
He uses the friendship, quote unquote, but he has the monster basically be his muscle to do whatever he wants.
Because like it's just like a situation where he's like, we could do something where we both gain something what we want. You want a friend, I want to create life, you know. And it's just kind of funny because again, you would think him extending his friendship or whatever, the only thing that the monsters had to compare to that is the hermit again, right. where he was just genuinely a good person, just trying to connect,
an actual wholesome friendship.
Dr. Pretorius has his own motives, but also is like, I could benefit greatly from this. Right.
Which I also think is great and poetic, because once again, tragedy of Frankenstein's monster, it's not him that's doing the harm, it's other human beings like that, and how they perceive him and how they use him. that makes him the monster. But really, he's just wants to chill and be with not alone. That's all the monster wants.
Yeah, and that whole scene just in the crypt with the mood alone, just the context of the nature of their conversation, just everything about it is another standout part of this film where I'm just like, yeah, this is absolutely fantastic, brilliant, perfect, and everything. And it does lead to another good moment whenever they obviously agree to have like a partnership to help create the Bride of Frankenstein for the monster and everything. And so whenever Dr. Pretorius ends up appearing again in front of Victor and just being like, oh, congrats on getting married. By the way, you're going to help me create life. And Victor's like, I said, no, I'm leaving. I'm not doing this. And then the monster comes in, and you might not remember this, but there's an illusion that Frankenstein's did in the first film that they refer to in this film. And it's whenever the monster comes in and goes, sit down.
Oh,
because in the first film, Victor was constantly saying, sit down, whenever it came to trying to train him with motor skills and everything. So it was like a great callback that now the tables have turned and now the monster's in control and everything. And Victor has to. Yeah, it's all good. I mean, you haven't seen it in a few years, and I've seen Frankenstein multiple times. So I was like, I have to point that out as such a cool, like, callback and everything. So
I love that. There's a lot of great, those sorts of devices they use. I mean, I love personally that like the story starts off and it's supposed to be the wedding night of Victor Frankenstein and Amelia or whatever, and then it ends on the wedding night, quote unquote, of Frankenstein's monster.
Yes, because they never were able to get hitched after the first film because they got interrupted.
Right, and still they do because she's kidnapped and brought away, and he's forced to make this monster in order to get her back or whatever.
Which they definitely spent a lot of time showing them working on the creation of the monster, which I don't feel like was a bad choice.
No, because it was necessary, I think, to build it up, because that's like the first movie was the same way too. It was a lot about creating the monster itself and how this is a previously impossible task, to create life. It's still hard to do the second time.
Yeah, and it's like very interesting too because now it's like a joint effort where it's both Dr. Frankenstein and Dr. Pretorius working together with their different methods, techniques, and everything. So they don't do the exact same way, but they use a lot of the similar stuff because, and I feel like that just makes sense overall for any experiments. You learn.
Yeah, because Dr. Pretorius' method is he grows the parts individually, which was cool. I wish they had showed that, but I know that would be hard with their special effects at the time.
Yes, yeah, I wish they would have done that more, but it's just literally one line of dialogue, just I literally create.
It's I grow them from the seed, life itself, or whatever.
Yes, doing that. But there is definitely one funny part whenever the heart they have just isn't working, it's defective and everything, because it just comes out of left field where basically they go to I believe it's Stephen Fry's character Coale, I think his name is, and they're like, go to the medical ward and find the heart of a young woman that died instantaneously. He needed to be perfect.
Died of an accident.
Yeah. And he's like, yeah, okay. And it just shows him going to stab a woman in an alley.
He's just waiting in an alley, and he's like, I'm gonna get 1,000 crowns, or whatever. He's just talking about how much money he's gonna make.
Just hyping himself up, and I love that it's brought back. They're like, oh yeah, the heart's perfect, and it's just like, yeah, it sure is. I got it real quick. It's like, you went to the medical ward, right?
And then he's like, what did she die of or something? And you could tell Dr. Pretorius is in on it because he mouthed something to him, and he's like, police incident.
Dr. Pretorius is just I don't care where you get it. I just want to create life, which again shows the good morality because Victor is trying to be more aware of morals as opposed to the first time where he's like, I don't care about morals. I'm so close to creating life, but he learns from the mistake, and so whenever he's like, yeah, go to medical ward, and then as soon as Victor starts worrying, did you kill someone for this? But I feel like it just works out good overall. And not only that, but again, whenever they're holding Elizabeth hostage and everything is the only reason why he has to continue going forward, because he's like, I have to save my wife and everything. But not only do you have Dr. Pretorius kind of breathing down his neck, the monster is also breathing down his neck. Like, there's one moment where Victor falls asleep and the monster wakes him up and he's like, keep working.
Yeah.
And he's like, I'm tired, please. I need my rest and everything. He's like, you can rest when you're done. Doing that.
That's a good strong bad
And
words.
I'm not going to lie. As soon as I said it, I'm like, fuck, I sounded like strong bad.
You can do it when you're done with these emails.
Look, you can drink a cold one once you're done building my wife. The cheat? Bring this guy some whiskey.
The cheat in an alley with a knife. Waiting to stab a woman.
Look, I'm telling you right now, we just got it from Bubs' stand.
Oh, never thought I would be breaking out my strong bad impersonation, but here we are. But I do like that Dr. Pretorius seems to like try to act like the monster's friend by being like, hey, calm down here, let's have a drink. And then he spikes the drink and he just falls over and he's like, that takes care of him, and just throws a blanket on him, just like an complete asshole. Oh my gosh. And we get to the creation scene, and it was already going to be impossible to top the first creation scene, because I feel like the first creation scene is like perfection and everything.
Yeah, because it had to be like the pinnacle of that movie. Yeah.
But I feel like overall this is still a good creation scene. They do like different stuff and different methods and everything else. There is definitely an odd part during it where I guess the only reason I could think why this happens is because, like, oh, someone did something bad morally, we have to reprimand them from that, is whenever the monster comes up and Carl's like, get away from it. He's like, "Rah!" And then he just throws him over the edge of the building.
Yeah, I think it's just to show how, like, unhinged and impatient Frankenstein's monster was at this point. You know, like, he's still a monster, you know, he's still... And if you react violently, because he went for the torch and was like waving it at him, Frank's like, I will just kill you, dude.
Yeah.
Just goes into monster mode, you know? But he's like on top of the fucking tower waiting for lightning to strike his bride, because he's like, I want this.
Yeah, I do like that, because the only thing I could think of is like, well, he killed that woman, so he has to die.
Right,
yeah.
Right. But I do think I think him and Dr. Pretorius just had to come to an end, you know, at the monster's hand or whatever, because those were the evil guys.
But yeah, and whenever it came to like the reveal, because like once the smoke settles, you know, away from like the lightning striking the kites, which sparks the body and everything, and they lower it back down, you see the classic hand twitch, which is funny because they even had like a callback to that whenever they're thinking Victor's potentially dead at the beginning of the film, but then he moves his hand down to the side, similar to his creation. So I think that's a cool callback allusion, as it were. But I like how they just... It's a weird thing where I felt like they were trying to copy it, but trying to make it more unique, because they showed a hand twitch, and, you know, in the first film, whenever the monster's hand twitches, that's whenever it's a classic, it's alive,
Right.
doing that. But instead, they remove some of the gauze to show, like, those piercing eyes behind there. And I feel like, again, they're just trying to make... It's clearly a callback to the first film, but whenever Colin Clive goes like, it's alive! And I was just like, you weren't going to be able to top it. I could have used some more gusto, my man. Or something like that. Or even have Dr. Pretorius just go off. Like, experience, like, it's alive! Doing that. Because obviously that's like one of the most classic horror film lines of all time.
Right.
And everything. And so many people have done it. But I just felt like it was... It's weird because, again, I felt like the character Victor was somewhat enjoying creating life, because you would see him like enjoy it, but also at the same point he's like, it's so hard to know like whether he's really remorseful, really enjoying it, or is just trying to do his best to save his wife Elizabeth and everything.
Yeah,
so
it's a mix of things. Yeah,
it's a mix of things that was kind of kept unclear. But again, as bad as it is, I don't feel like the focus was about Victor as much in this film as it was the first one, where it was like Victor and the monster.
Right. He does play a much smaller part. Yeah.
So but yeah, and so whenever they prop up the body or whatever. I like how the gauze is like wrapped around the legs, almost like a dress and everything. It's just visually nice. And then you get to the spectacular reveal of the Bride of Frankenstein, which like you could just break it down to multiple stuff, but like I love the flowing like kind of like gown she has, but it almost feels like a sheet or something like
right,
that.
because it's like, you know, a lab sheet or whatever that they put over, you know, to keep blood off of them, but it's like they the way that they cut it and shape it looks like the dress, you know.
Yeah, doing that, because like pretty much like in the first film, the monster already has the clothes because that's what the body was buried in, whereas this one they created life, so it's just them trying to put something together,
bandages and that,
and then her having like the gauze still wrapped around her hand, arms or everything, and then of course you have the classic like hair sort of like beehive thing with the white streak. It's so good, and the stitching there.
I love that, the stitching like under her chin and stuff. That looks surgical. But...
I very much love the choice that this is very much a much more refined creation as opposed to, again, like, you know, the monsters build and everything where they do look a bit misshapen and everything, because obviously this is the first time he's created Victor's ever created life, but with Dr. Pretorius and Dr. Frankenstein working on this, it's more refined and everything. And one thing that I don't know if you noticed, but at the opening and ending credits where it says the monster's mate, it never revealed who the person was.
Yeah, it just said question mark, question mark, question mark.
Yeah, because like in the first film, they revealed at the end of the film that Boris Karloff was the monster or whatever. But it's funny because we know exactly who the monster is, and that's Elsa Lanchester, who played Mary Shelley. She was also the bride, which could have fooled me because she acts completely different. Whereas like she was very elegant, soft-spoken, and just very humorous at the beginning. You see her just like blank stare, just wide eyes, looking around, very primitive, like just sort of analyzing the situation. And I guess one of the things that I wanted to hear from your perspective, Aaron, is whenever she does come to life and everything, and then how she chooses to respond to Frankenstein's creation. How did you feel about it? Like that sort of build up.
I love that because that's the ending I'm most familiar with when it comes to like what happens when they actually meet, and is like her, like Frankenstein's so excited to have this creature that's just like him, and then finds that in her humanity she also sees him as a monster or whatever. And so it's like, so he's hideous in her eyes too, and he just instantly recognizes it as a failure, and then he's like, well, I'm gonna kill us all, because he was like, you were right, like we weren't right to live. I did think it was stupid that the thing had a self-destruct button. Like,
that was so convenient and
like
stupid.
A Phantom Menace ass, like, all right, well, this is the button that explodes the entire castle for like 45 seconds of explosion. That's the thing I was talking about. I was like, that didn't look like a model. I think they just blew up some old stone tower. Like, there was like dust and bricks flying out of that, and I was like, wow, okay.
But it's, man, it is that is another golden scene like that I remember for this film immensely. It's just the bride herself, like, and she has very little screen time, but my God, Elsa just makes it perfect. Absolutely nails it, and just looking confused and scared. Confused and scared, and then just immediately whenever the monster tries to go up and grab her hand, she just screams like just an absolute shriek and everything. And of course the monster's confused at first, and it's like, oh, sorry, I didn't mean to scare you. But the thing that I like about it as well is that she kept clinging on to Victor out of everybody.
She recognizes herself more as a human than as a monster, and so the monster is like, oh.
And not only that, but just the fact that it's almost like just sort of that innate instinct of just gravitating towards like what you feel is like safe and everything. Because again, this is like recognizes it as like a mother figure, as weird as it is, and latches onto that. And not only that, but Victor has learned humanity and everything. So just her gravitating towards that and everything, and moving away from the monster. I felt like it was such a deliberate choice that works amazingly. And of course, they try. Oh man, and it's so heartbreaking too, because you feel for the monster or whatever, but the monster is almost caught up in the same high that Dr. Pretorius is, where they just want to do something selfish for themselves. They're like,
Right.
I need this or whatever. And so, but at the same point, you feel that same sort of kindness where the monster isn't trying to forcefully like grab her and just be like, yep, you're mine or whatever.
Right.
He wants like that amicable two-way relationship and everything.
He understands friend. He know what I mean. He's like, yeah.
And so that's what makes it all the more heartbreaking whenever they try to sit down and he tries to grab her hand and they hold it for a while and she doesn't respond or react or anything. And for him, he's just feeling happiness because he's like, oh my gosh, I finally have a friend.
Someone like me, yeah.
And then as she turns to look at him, he starts to have that worry in his face and starts shaking his head, almost like, please don't break my heart. And then she shrieks at him once again, just trying to get away and everything. And that's whenever he just learns, like, this was a mistake. Everything's a mistake. I should not be alive. We should have never done this, And I do like that he chooses to spare Victor because he doesn't blame Victor in this, because he's the monster was the one that said, you're going to create me this. And while it is, I'm sure, like a notion of like, oh, we can't let the main character die or whatever, move it along, I feel like it just does make narrative sense.
Yes. I think the big brain thing here is Victor Frankenstein created a monster that then makes the same mistakes he makes. Like, he realizes his mistake and he's like, I can never make life again. But then he gets corrupted by science and the universities and the things of the unknown. What could happen? And Frankenstein's monster's like, yes, I need a creation, I need a friend, I need to accomplish this too. Forces that to happen by do work, and then whenever he makes it, realizes his mistake and is a monster that's scared of him, and he's like, I made a monster and I am a monster, and he's like, well, and then so when he realizes, I should have never made this and I should have never been made, and so he kills us both or whatever. He like follows the same arc that Victor Frankenstein does, just delayed, which is great because he shares his name almost. We call him Frankenstein.
Yeah. Like father, like son, am I right? Yeah.
And that's, obviously we've already talked about the parallels of like it starts on Victor's wedding day and it ends on Frankenstein the monster's wedding day.
Oh my gosh.
It's like so it is like the sins of the father continue or whatever. It's that sort of line, but it's also just, I think it's the most appropriate ending as like a tragedy of Frankenstein, is like, because Frankenstein in the first movie especially, he's portrayed as like anxious and scared, and he's only monstrous by virtue of who created him or whatever. And so for the bride to also be the same way, she's monstrous by her height and how she was made, but she's just scared and doesn't and is trying to avoid harm too. She's just a scared little animal at the end of the day. And so it's to see like, oh, I made me and I'm suffering and I made someone else that suffers. In that moment, that's how he can identify with Victor Frankenstein and be like, oh, I made the same mistake he made. Like he has enough intelligence to know that and be like, you go. Like, I think he feels a more connection to him by the end of it. And he's like, you were right. We should not have made this. I shouldn't have listened to that other guy. He was right all along. Go, Victor, and I'll sacrifice myself to blow these guys to smithereens or whatever.
Yeah, it's definitely a power scene, and you said it perfectly there. I feel like you just hit a lot of the notes that they were trying to do. And again, I think it is a very masterful move to convey that much and not have to, like, over-explain or just explain to the audience why. It's just you pick up the feelings and the vibes and everything. Right. And I like not only, the monster makes a choice to destroy himself, not only to destroy the Bride of Frankenstein, but also to destroy Dr. Pretorius, because I think, the monster also recognizes you're the one that wanted this. You're going to continue doing this. Whereas Victor, it didn't want to do this at all. We all need to go out, so we stop the chain reaction.
Right.
Granted, I didn't stop from several sequels spawning, but you know that's what's up. But
that's Hollywood.
But this was the last one that James Whale did work on and everything. But I feel like, again, it is a powerful film, and it does end up with a bang. So I almost feel like, yes, this is a better. I will give Bride of Frankenstein this. It has a better ending than the first one.
Because I've scrubbed everything after the windmill burning down happened. What happened after the windmill that ruined it?
The Burgomeister just shows up and says like, Dr. Frankenstein is okay. Hail House of Frankenstein. Hail House of Frankenstein. Yes, and then it just cuts the credits. It's such like a big, just sucks the suspense out of it, which I'm sure they were like trying to be like, yep, Victor's okay.
Yeah, they're probably afraid of, can't have an unhappy ending.
But they could have literally been like, oh, he's still breathing. Let's get him help or whatever. And then it cuts like with saying the end with like burning windmill in the background. I felt like it would have been better. At least with this one, it just, again, it follows your method of just ended with an explosion. Yeah. There's just no fart noise.
Just Michael Bay it, baby.
Yes, doing that. But
blow some shit up.
Yeah, I will mention one other thing that I do feel like is very convenient is just Elizabeth whenever like the monster's threatening to blow the building, and Elizabeth's like, Victor, trying to break in or whatever. And I'm just like, weren't you tied up somewhere? But I guess they needed both assists. She managed to break, because it doesn't show her breaking out. She just appears.
No, and I assume that like maybe they drug her along nearby or something. Whenever...
Yeah, it had to be somewhere near because they went back to...
Because Frankenstein was supposed to be the one that was like her captor or whatever, like the monster, yeah.
Yes.
And he was there at the tower, so yeah.
Yeah, just let that go. But yeah, that's the thing, because it was the old lab that Victor used in order to create life and everything there. So, yeah. And aside from that, I don't feel like the film doesn't really have any noteworthy scenes. Again, there's a lot of just wandering, like people screaming at the monster, and the monster just waves his arms and runs.
Young girls being scared as they cross his path, or some old couple that lost their son last time, or whatever, they follow him. But yeah, like so much of it is like, it's just people screaming at the monster.
There's just nothing to say, which is sad, and that's what hurts the film, but it's just those golden moments that gives this film such a gravitas and elevates it and everything. Because if it wasn't for those big moments, the big overall meaning, messages, everything else like that, truly, I feel like this film would sink very fast.
I'd agree. Yeah. I mean, they definitely had good source material, and I'm glad that they immortalized Mary Shelley that way, at least. I wonder, I'm just curious. Okay, I just had to look up when she died. I was like, I wonder if she was anywhere close to being alive whenever, like, if people would have known her about this time. But she died in 1851. Okay,
wow. But that's even further back than what I thought.
Yeah, I thought she died maybe in the late 800s, but
that's what I was thinking as well. But it turns out, no, that is not the case there.
Probably never saw a film in 1851, much less thought hers would be adapted. But.
No, for sure. But I'm sure she would have maybe enjoyed it, got a kick out of it. Who knows?
Yeah, I didn't know how much they could draw for the character of Mary Shelley, besides obviously what she's written. But
But yeah, overall, pretty much solid thumbs up from both of us about the film. So if you want to go check it out, we both definitely highly recommend it. Definitely fits the mood, especially with the dreary weather rolling in and everything. And how's about we talk about the next film we're going to review for the podcast here? Anyways, so this film we're going to be watching for our podcast came out last year, and we actually saw a trailer for it whenever we went to go see Five Nights at Freddy's.
Oh no, is it that Thanksgiving one?
Oh, you bet your ass it's
that.
I'm sorry if the episode didn't release Thanksgiving Day.
No, I think it's going to be hilariously bad, but
yes.
But I think it's also just going to be bad. Like, I think it's just going to be a bad overall movie. Like, trying to be campy bad, but probably just bad. That's my prediction.
Well, yeah, let's see what Eli Roth is cooking then, because thank you all so much for listening to this episode, and we'll see y'all again next time when we're Poppin the Scary with Thanksgiving.
What a scary title.
Yeah, I'm scared of my family. Be sure to subscribe to our YouTube, Castbox, or iTunes platforms to stay up to date when new episodes drop. To see what Aaron and I are up to, check out our respective Twitter accounts. For me, it is @ColeKirkVA, and for Aaron, it is @AnimalGameDev. Thank you all so much for listening to our podcast. We'll speak to you all again next time when we're poppin' the scary.